You loved your soulmate while they practiced forgetting you. Don't scroll, stay with me, because this sentence isn't meant to accuse or dramatize, it's meant to describe a quiet truth that many people live through without language for it. You were loving in real time, fully present in your feelings, while they were slowly rehearsing distance in theirs. Not because they didn't feel anything, but because feeling everything scared them. Forgetting wasn't sudden. It was practiced. Repeated. Rehearsed in small moments of emotional withdrawal, delayed responses, and internal justifications that told them distance was safer than honesty. Listen carefully, because practicing forgetting doesn't mean forgetting worked. It means they tried. Over and over. They told themselves stories to survive what they didn't know how to face. They minimized moments that mattered. They reframed connection as inconvenience. They distracted themselves with noise, busyness, or other people. Each act of forgetting was an attempt to quiet something inside them that refused to disappear on its own. And while they practiced, you stayed. Not physically perhaps, but emotionally. You stayed honest. You stayed open. You stayed real. Don't scroll, because this imbalance is what made the connection feel so painful and so confusing. You were loving forward. They were coping backward. You were choosing presence. They were choosing numbness. That doesn't mean they were cruel. It means they were overwhelmed. People practice forgetting when they don't believe they can carry what they feel without breaking something inside themselves. Stay with me, because this practice didn't happen all at once. It happened in layers. First they tried to forget the intensity. Then they tried to forget the meaning. Then they tried to forget the future they sensed but weren't ready to live into. Each layer added distance. Not because love faded, but because fear grew louder. Fear of responsibility. Fear of change. Fear of becoming someone they didn't feel prepared to be. Listen to this deeply, because while they were practicing forgetting, you were practicing something else entirely. You were practicing patience. You were practicing understanding. You were practicing holding space for someone who didn't know how to stay. You told yourself stories too, but yours were about hope, timing, and compassion. You believed that if you loved steadily enough, clarity would come. And that belief wasn't naive. It was human. Don't scroll, because this is where many people misunderstand the story. They assume the person who practiced forgetting was heartless. Often, they were just unskilled. Unskilled at staying present with discomfort. Unskilled at naming fear. Unskilled at choosing truth when truth required courage. Forgetting became a survival mechanism, not a rejection. Stay with me, because this explains why the connection never ended cleanly. You felt them pull away, but you also felt them linger. You sensed absence, but also awareness. That tension wasn't in your head. It was the result of two different inner processes happening at the same time. You were integrating the experience. They were compartmentalizing it. Integration brings clarity. Compartmentalization delays it. Listen carefully, because practicing forgetting requires constant effort. It means revising memories. It means suppressing emotion. It means telling yourself that what mattered didn't really matter. That effort is exhausting. And exhaustion often shows up as irritability, inconsistency, or emotional flatness. You may have felt this without understanding why. You may have sensed that they were tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. Don't scroll, because this is also why you may have felt unseen at times. Not ignored, but not fully met. When someone is practicing forgetting, they can only show up partially. They are conserving energy. They are avoiding depth. They are protecting themselves from feelings they don't know how to resolve. That partial presence can feel lonelier than absence. Stay with me, because loving someone who is practicing forgetting requires restraint you didn't ask for. You had to hold back words. You had to temper emotion. You had to make yourself smaller in moments to avoid pushing them further away. That self-editing takes a toll. Over time, it teaches you where you are compromising your own truth to keep connection alive. Listen to this deeply, because at some point, something shifted in you. You began to notice the imbalance not as a flaw in you, but as a dynamic. You saw that love was not being met with presence. You realized that no amount of care could replace someone else's willingness to feel. That realization didn't harden you. It clarified you. Don't scroll, because this is where the practice of forgetting and the practice of loving diverge completely. Loving requires risk. Forgetting avoids it. Loving moves toward truth. Forgetting moves away from it. Both are choices, but only one leads to growth. You chose growth, even when it hurt. Stay with me, because the person who practiced forgetting often believes they've moved on long before they actually have. They confuse numbness with closure. They mistake distance for healing. But forgetting without integration doesn't bring peace. It brings fragmentation. Pieces of the connection resurface unexpectedly, because they were never fully processed. Listen carefully, because this is why time didn't erase the bond in the way you expected. Time only works when honesty is present. Without honesty, time just stretches avoidance. You may have felt moments of relief followed by sudden heaviness. That wasn't regression. It was unresolved emotion asking to be acknowledged. Don't scroll, because your love was not wasted. Loving someone while they practiced forgetting taught you something essential about yourself. It showed you your capacity for depth. It showed you your endurance. It also showed you your limits. You learned that love cannot be one-sided without cost. And that lesson matters. Stay with me, because this story is not about blaming them or idealizing yourself. It's about understanding the mismatch. You were willing to feel fully. They were not. That difference shaped everything that followed. Not because either of you were bad, but because readiness matters. Listen to this deeply, because recognizing this dynamic frees you from self-questioning. You stop asking why you weren't enough. You stop wondering what you could have done differently. You see that the issue was never your love. It was their relationship with their own feelings. Don't scroll, because this understanding also reframes the ending. The connection didn't end because love ran out. It ended because avoidance reached its limit. You cannot build a future with someone who is practicing forgetting your presence while benefiting from your care. Stay with me, because as you integrate this truth, something softens inside you. You release the urge to be remembered by someone who couldn't stay present. You no longer measure your worth by their ability to hold you. You begin to choose connection that doesn't require rehearsal to sustain. Listen carefully, because this story is not meant to reopen wounds. It's meant to name what happened so it can finally rest. Naming brings clarity. Clarity brings peace. And peace allows you to move forward without dragging the past behind you. Don't scroll, because the final truth is this: you loved honestly. That matters. It shaped you into someone capable of real connection. And the right person will not practice forgetting you to survive. They will practice staying. Stay till the end, because if this message resonated with you, take a moment to like this video so it reaches others who need these words. Share it with someone who may be living this story quietly. And subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. Don't scroll, stay with me, because after loving someone while they practiced forgetting, the aftermath doesn't arrive as silence alone. It arrives as a strange emotional echo. You begin to notice how your heart still knows the rhythm of connection, even when there is no longer anyone meeting it. This phase is quieter than the pain, but deeper than the confusion. It's where you start realizing that what hurt most wasn't that they tried to forget you, but that you kept remembering in a space where memory wasn't welcomed. Listen carefully, because practicing forgetting doesn't end when distance begins. It continues long after. They keep rehearsing indifference. They keep telling themselves that what they felt was temporary, exaggerated, or situational. And each time they do this, they have to push down the truth again. That constant suppression creates an internal dullness. From the outside, it may look like they've moved on. On the inside, it feels more like they've gone quiet to survive. Don't scroll, because this is where you start to see the cost of that forgetting. Forgetting doesn't erase connection. It delays reckoning. While you were processing openly, they were compartmentalizing. You allowed the feelings to move through you. They tried to box theirs away. And boxes don't dissolve emotion. They just store it until it leaks. Stay with me, because this explains why the absence didn't feel final. Why even after time passed, something about the story felt unfinished. When someone practices forgetting instead of integrating, the ending never settles. It lingers. It floats between denial and longing. And that limbo creates subtle disturbances in future connections, both for them and for you. Listen to this deeply, because loving while someone is forgetting teaches you restraint the hard way. You learn how to withhold parts of yourself to keep the peace. You learn how to soften your truth so it doesn't overwhelm them. You learn how to carry emotional weight quietly so they don't have to. Over time, that quiet carrying becomes heavy. And one day, you realize you've been doing emotional labor alone. Don't scroll, because this is often the moment you stop romanticizing patience. You see that patience without reciprocity becomes self-erasure. You weren't asking for perfection. You were asking for presence. And presence is not something someone can practice avoiding and still offer fully. Stay with me, because this realization doesn't arrive as anger. It arrives as clarity. A calm understanding that love cannot be sustained when one person is learning how to forget instead of learning how to stay. That understanding doesn't make you bitter. It makes you honest. Listen carefully, because this is also when you begin to see your own strength differently. You loved without numbing yourself. You didn't rehearse detachment. You didn't turn away from feeling just because it was hard. That required courage. Courage you may not have acknowledged before. Don't scroll, because you may notice now how often they needed distance to function. How closeness overwhelmed them. How emotional presence made them retreat. These patterns didn't start with you. They existed long before. You didn't cause them. You simply touched something they weren't prepared to face. Stay with me, because this phase brings a quiet grieving. Not just for the person, but for the version of the connection that never got a chance to exist fully. You grieve the conversations that didn't happen. The moments that were felt but never named. The future that was sensed but avoided. This grief is subtle, but it is real. Listen to this deeply, because grieving what never fully formed is harder than grieving what clearly ended. There is no ceremony for it. No clear goodbye. Just a slow release of something that lived mostly in potential. Allowing yourself to grieve it is part of reclaiming your emotional honesty. Don't scroll, because while they were practicing forgetting, you were practicing remembering yourself. You were learning what it feels like to be emotionally available without being met. You were learning where your limits are. You were learning how much you are willing to give before something becomes unsustainable. These lessons stay with you. Stay with me, because this is where the dynamic flips internally. You stop asking why they couldn't love you the same way. You start asking why you accepted so little presence for so long. That question is not self-blame. It is self-awareness. And self-awareness changes your future. Listen carefully, because this is also where compassion transforms. You may still understand why they avoided feeling. You may still see their fear. But compassion no longer overrides your needs. You don't sacrifice yourself to make sense of someone else's avoidance. You hold empathy without self-abandonment. Don't scroll, because the person who practiced forgetting often doesn't realize how much effort it takes to keep forgetting. Forgetting requires vigilance. It requires distraction. It requires avoidance. Loving, on the other hand, requires honesty and courage, but it brings relief. That difference matters. You chose the harder path initially, but the freer one in the long run. Stay with me, because this is where you begin to feel lighter. Not because the memory disappears, but because you stop carrying the imbalance. You no longer wait for them to remember you properly. You no longer hope they will wake up and choose presence. You release that responsibility. Listen to this deeply, because releasing responsibility doesn't mean the connection meant nothing. It means you are done compensating for what wasn't mutual. You are done filling emotional gaps that were never meant to be yours to fill. Don't scroll, because you may also notice how this experience sharpened your intuition. You now recognize when someone is emotionally present versus emotionally avoidant. You feel the difference between engagement and performance. You sense when someone is leaning in versus slowly rehearsing their exit. That awareness is not cynicism. It is wisdom earned through experience. Stay with me, because this wisdom doesn't close your heart. It protects it. It allows you to love again without repeating the same dynamic. You will not confuse intensity with intimacy. You will not mistake longing for connection. You will look for presence, not promise. Listen carefully, because this part of the story is about reclaiming your narrative. You were not someone who loved too much. You were someone who loved honestly. And honesty always reveals mismatch sooner or later. That revelation is painful, but it is also freeing. Don't scroll, because the quiet truth is this: someone practicing forgetting can never meet someone practicing presence for long. Eventually, one grows tired of avoiding. Or the other grows tired of waiting. And when that happens, separation becomes inevitable, not as punishment, but as alignment. Stay with me, because as this understanding settles, you may feel a calm resolve. A sense that you no longer need to prove anything to anyone. You know how you love. You know what you offered. And you know that what you want next must meet you where you are, not where someone else is hiding. Listen to this deeply, because this phase is not the end of the story. It is the ground clearing. It is the moment you stop loving in a space that requires you to shrink. And that moment matters more than any ending. Don't scroll, because the love you gave did not disappear into nothing. It shaped you. It refined you. And it prepared you for a connection where love is not practiced in silence, but lived out loud. Don't scroll, stay with me, because after recognizing the imbalance between loving and forgetting, something subtle begins to shift inside you. This is the phase where the story stops being about what they did and starts becoming about what you are no longer willing to do. You begin to notice how often you adjusted yourself to keep the connection alive. How you softened your truth. How you waited in emotional doorways that never fully opened. This awareness doesn't arrive as regret. It arrives as clarity. And clarity has a grounding quality that pain never did. Listen carefully, because this is where the emotional fog starts to lift. You realize that while they were practicing forgetting, they were also practicing avoidance. Avoidance of depth. Avoidance of accountability. Avoidance of the kind of presence that real connection demands. And you see now that avoidance isn't neutral. It has consequences. It slowly erodes trust, safety, and intimacy, even when feelings remain. Don't scroll, because this realization changes how you remember the past. You no longer replay moments wondering what you did wrong. Instead, you see the pattern clearly. You see how often you reached toward them emotionally while they leaned away internally. You see how much energy you spent interpreting silence. And you see that none of that was sustainable, no matter how much love existed. Stay with me, because this stage often brings a quiet reclaiming of self. You begin to redirect the emotional energy that once went toward waiting, wondering, and hoping. You use it to listen to yourself instead. To notice your needs. To honor your limits. This redirection doesn't feel dramatic. It feels relieving. Like setting down something heavy you didn't realize you were carrying. Listen to this deeply, because loving someone who is practicing forgetting teaches you about emotional asymmetry. One person stays engaged. The other slowly disengages while benefiting from the connection's warmth. Over time, that asymmetry creates imbalance. And imbalance always demands correction. Either through honest conversation or through separation. When conversation never came, separation became inevitable. Don't scroll, because this is also where your understanding of love matures. You stop defining love solely by feeling. You begin defining it by behavior, consistency, and willingness to stay present when things get uncomfortable. You realize that love without presence eventually becomes longing, not partnership. That distinction reshapes what you want moving forward. Stay with me, because you may notice that your emotional responses are calmer now. Less reactive. Less urgent. You don't feel the same pull to explain yourself or to be understood by them. Not because you've closed off, but because you've integrated the truth. Integration brings steadiness. It allows you to hold complexity without being consumed by it. Listen carefully, because this phase often includes moments of unexpected peace. Not happiness in the obvious sense, but a sense of internal alignment. You feel more like yourself again. More anchored. You trust your perceptions instead of second-guessing them. You no longer override your discomfort to preserve connection. That trust is a turning point. Don't scroll, because you may still feel tenderness toward them. That tenderness doesn't disappear just because understanding arrives. But it no longer dictates your choices. You can care without chasing. You can remember without reopening. You can acknowledge the bond without needing it to continue. That balance is emotional maturity. Stay with me, because this is where you start noticing how much space opens up when you stop trying to be remembered by someone who is trying to forget. That space is not empty. It fills with clarity, creativity, and presence. You become more available to your own life. More responsive to what feels aligned. Less tolerant of ambiguity that drains you. Listen to this deeply, because you are also releasing a subtle form of self-blame. You stop asking whether you were too much, too emotional, or too invested. You see that your capacity to love deeply was never the problem. The problem was trying to offer depth to someone who was rehearsing distance. That mismatch was never a reflection of your worth. Don't scroll, because this understanding also shifts how you view endings. You no longer see this connection as something that failed. You see it as something that revealed truth. Truth about readiness. Truth about capacity. Truth about what love requires to survive. Revelation is not failure. It is instruction. Stay with me, because this is where your standards begin to change quietly. You are no longer impressed by words alone. You listen for follow-through. You pay attention to how someone handles discomfort. You notice whether they lean in or disappear when things matter. These observations don't make you guarded. They make you discerning. Listen carefully, because discernment protects without closing your heart. It allows you to remain open while staying safe. You don't have to rehearse forgetting to survive anymore. You don't need to numb yourself to avoid pain. You have learned that clarity, even when painful, is less damaging than prolonged ambiguity. Don't scroll, because this stage often brings a sense of emotional closure that didn't come from conversation. It came from understanding. You understand why things unfolded the way they did. You understand your role and theirs. And that understanding allows you to stop seeking answers externally. You already have them. Stay with me, because this is also where you stop romanticizing potential. You see how often potential kept you invested while reality stayed limited. You learn to value what is lived over what is imagined. That shift changes everything. It grounds love in the present instead of suspending it in hope. Listen to this deeply, because you may now feel more selective with your energy. Not withdrawn, but intentional. You notice when something feels one-sided faster. You trust that feeling instead of rationalizing it away. You choose reciprocity over intensity. That choice brings peace. Don't scroll, because this peace is not the absence of feeling. It is the presence of self-respect. Self-respect doesn't demand attention. It simply refuses to disappear to keep connection alive. You are embodying that now. Stay with me, because this phase marks the moment when the story stops looping. You are no longer revisiting the same questions. You are no longer searching for signs. You are living forward instead of backward. That forward movement is subtle, but steady. Listen carefully, because this is also where gratitude can coexist with release. You can appreciate what the connection showed you without wanting it back. You can honor the love you felt without needing it to be reciprocated now. That balance frees you from resentment. Don't scroll, because the most important shift in this phase is internal. You stop identifying as the one who was left loving while the other forgot. You start identifying as the one who chose honesty over avoidance. That identity is empowering. Stay with me, because the love you gave did not vanish. It transformed into wisdom. Wisdom about pacing. Wisdom about presence. Wisdom about what kind of connection nourishes rather than depletes you. That wisdom will guide you moving forward. Listen to this deeply, because the story is no longer about loss. It is about alignment. Alignment with yourself. Alignment with truth. Alignment with the kind of love that doesn't require rehearsal to stay alive. Don't scroll, because as this understanding settles, something becomes clear. You are no longer living in the shadow of someone else's avoidance. You are living in the light of your own clarity. And that changes what comes next. Don't scroll, stay with me, because this is the phase where everything you've understood finally begins to settle into your body, not just your mind. You are no longer thinking your way through what happened. You are living differently because of it. The shift is subtle but unmistakable. You don't wake up wondering what they're doing. You don't feel the same pull to check, interpret, or decode silence. The story has moved from emotional noise to quiet knowing. And quiet knowing is powerful. Listen carefully, because this stage is not loud. There is no dramatic closure scene. No final conversation playing in your head. Instead, there is space. Space where urgency used to live. Space where longing once echoed. That space can feel unfamiliar at first. Almost empty. But it isn't emptiness. It's availability. Availability for your own thoughts, your own rhythm, your own life. Don't scroll, because this is where many people get confused. They mistake the calm for detachment or loss of depth. But what you're experiencing is integration. You've integrated the lesson without hardening your heart. You didn't become numb to survive. You became grounded. There is a difference. Numbness disconnects. Groundedness connects you back to yourself. Stay with me, because this phase also changes how you experience memories. When memories arise now, they don't hijack your nervous system. They come and go like weather, not like storms. You can remember without reliving. You can reflect without reopening. That's not because the connection didn't matter. It's because it no longer controls you. Listen to this deeply, because control is what you quietly reclaimed. Not control over them or the outcome, but control over your inner world. You no longer hand that over to someone who couldn't stay present. You learned that your emotional stability cannot depend on someone else's willingness to feel. That realization is freedom. Don't scroll, because this is also where your self-trust solidifies. You trust the signals you feel in your body. You trust the pause when something doesn't feel right. You trust your instinct to step back without needing proof. That trust wasn't always there. It was built through discomfort, patience, and honesty with yourself. Stay with me, because your standards didn't rise out of bitterness. They rose out of experience. You now understand the difference between someone who is overwhelmed by intimacy and someone who is capable of it. You no longer confuse intensity with availability. You no longer romanticize distance. You choose presence, even if it arrives more slowly. Listen carefully, because this stage also softens your view of yourself. You stop judging the version of you who stayed longer than you should have. You stop criticizing your patience or your hope. You see that you were doing the best you could with the information you had. That compassion toward yourself is part of the healing. Shame dissolves when understanding replaces judgment. Don't scroll, because this is also where your nervous system begins to reset. You feel safer in calm connections. You feel less drawn to emotional highs and lows. Stability no longer feels boring. It feels nourishing. That shift is profound. It means your body has learned that love does not have to hurt to be real. Stay with me, because you may notice how your conversations change. You speak more clearly. You don't over-explain. You don't rush to fill silence. You let things unfold. This isn't indifference. It's confidence. Confidence that you don't need to chase understanding. What aligns will meet you halfway. Listen to this deeply, because this phase often reveals how much energy you used to spend managing someone else's comfort. You notice how often you minimized your needs to keep things smooth. You see how much emotional labor you were carrying quietly. And as you stop doing that, you feel lighter. Not because life got easier, but because you stopped carrying what wasn't yours. Don't scroll, because this is where forgiveness takes on a new shape. You don't forgive to reconcile. You forgive to release. You release yourself from replaying the same questions. You release them from the role they once held in your emotional life. Forgiveness here is not an event. It's a gradual loosening. Stay with me, because you are also becoming more honest about what you want. Not in a demanding way, but in a grounded one. You want mutual effort. You want emotional availability. You want someone who doesn't need to practice forgetting you to feel safe. Wanting that doesn't make you unrealistic. It makes you clear. Listen carefully, because clarity attracts clarity. When you stop settling for partial presence, full presence becomes recognizable. You won't have to convince someone to stay. You won't have to wonder where you stand. The connection will feel simpler, not because it lacks depth, but because it lacks confusion. Don't scroll, because this stage also brings a quiet courage. Courage to say no without guilt. Courage to walk away from ambiguity. Courage to trust that what is meant for you will not require you to disappear emotionally to keep it. That courage isn't loud. It shows up in small, consistent choices. Stay with me, because you may notice that your sense of time changes too. You are less focused on when things will happen. You are more present with how things feel now. That presence grounds you in reality instead of keeping you suspended in hope or fear. Listen to this deeply, because this is where you stop measuring your worth by someone else's memory of you. Whether they remember or forget no longer defines you. You know who you are. You know how you love. And you know that your love deserves to be met, not avoided. Don't scroll, because this phase also allows you to appreciate the strength it took to love honestly in an environment that didn't support it. You didn't close off. You didn't harden. You stayed open until it became clear that openness needed to be directed elsewhere. That is not weakness. That is discernment learned through experience. Stay with me, because the story now belongs to you again. Not to the version of them who practiced forgetting. Not to the dynamic that required imbalance. The narrative has returned to your hands. And you are writing it from a place of awareness, not longing. Listen carefully, because this is the moment where the past finally feels complete. Not resolved through conversation, but through growth. Completion doesn't always come from answers. Sometimes it comes from no longer needing them. Don't scroll, because what remains now is simple and true. You are more aligned. More present. More yourself. And that alignment will naturally guide you toward connections that don't require rehearsal, avoidance, or emotional hiding. Stay with me, because the quiet truth of this phase is this: you didn't lose love. You learned how love must be lived to survive. And that knowledge will shape everything that comes next.